I never imagined my life would take this turn. 27 years I dedicated to raising my son, Samuel, yet on his wedding day, I felt like a complete stranger to him. It all began with a phone call 2 days prior. A curt message from Samuel, requesting my absence from the ceremony. His words were stark, devoid of any tenderness or regret. He claimed my presence would be disastrous, that I'd mortify him in front of his peers and prospective relatives. I should have been inured to his coldness by now, but hearing it again, particularly on a day signifying the commencement of his own family, felt like a profound betrayal. I was seated on the veranda of my workshop, gazing out at the Pacific Ocean when his call came. The air held a refreshing crispness. The sun, low on the horizon, painted the city in hues of gold. The gentle rhythm of the waves was almost imperceptible, yet all my attention was absorbed by the crushing weight in my chest. His voice, clipped and impatient, was a stark contrast to the memory of the child I once held in my arms. The boy who vowed to be my protector in his adulthood, who promised never to abandon me. But that was before he discovered the allure of material wealth. I had been the one who tirelessly stayed up nights, tending to him when he was ill, the one who toiled long hours in my antique restoration studio, meticulously preserving artifacts for the future we were building together. After the passing of Arthur, it was just Samuel and me. I strived to provide him with a sense of security, to offer him everything he needed, to instill in him the belief that we were sufficient, that together we could conquer any challenge. However, somewhere along the way, his perspective shifted. He no longer saw a mother content with a peaceful existence. Instead, he saw a woman who didn't share his insatiable desire for riches and social standing. She craved the financial security and elevated social status that came with being part of a prosperous family. She viewed me as nothing more than a relic of the past, an elderly woman clinging to outdated ideals. The conversation concluded without a farewell, and I remained there for a considerable time, lost in the contemplation of the endless ocean, allowing the rhythmic crash of waves to wash over my sorrow. But it wasn't the sting of his words that inflicted the deepest wound. It was the stark reality of the chasm that separated us. I no longer belonged in his world, and hadn't for a significant period. Samuel failed to comprehend my lifestyle choices. He remained oblivious to the substantial Bitcoin investment Arthur had made years ago, the modest fortune I had carefully preserved, not for myself, but for the future Arthur had envisioned. I chose not to burden Samuel with this knowledge, particularly given his apparent lack of appreciation for the quiet sacrifices I had made for him. He yearned for more, and that was precisely what I couldn't provide. I donned my coat and left the workshop, fully aware of the course of action I needed to take. It was no longer about attending the wedding. It was about granting him his freedom, completely and irrevocably. This wedding was for him, not me, and he clearly had no place for me in his new life. I never harbored grandiose aspirations for my own life. In my youth, I considered travel, exploring the globe, perhaps even writing a novel or two. But life, as it often does, charts its own course. While I had personal dreams, I quickly understood that my reality revolved around giving, expecting nothing in return. Arthur used to say we didn't require much to experience happiness. We had each other, a small, cozy apartment, and an abundance of love to sustain us throughout our lives. That was our reality during those initial years, while we were establishing ourselves. But the arrival of Samuel altered everything. I transformed into someone entirely different, someone who would do anything to elicit a smile from my son, to ensure he possessed everything he needed. Our limited financial resources held no significance. The occasional financial hardship didn't matter. We were a family, and that was all that mattered. I dedicated the following years to teaching Samuel about the world, the subtle nuances of life. We didn't chase after the fleeting allure of wealth or fame, but I consistently endeavored to equip him with the tools necessary to forge a meaningful life. My restoration workshop consumed most of my days, where I would meticulously work on ancient manuscripts, preserving these fragile artifacts, each restoration a small act of love, a meditative process. I slowly found solace in my work, perhaps because it allowed me to channel my energy into something tangible and avoid confronting the complexities of the outside world. My resilience, my capacity to rebuild, my ability to create a new life, even without the man I once believed I couldn't live without. I was unaware at the time, but Arthur had left me something truly invaluable, something that would irrevocably alter the course of my life. Years after his death, while sorting through Arthur's belongings, papers, books, and miscellaneous scribbled notes, I stumbled upon the key. It was small, aged, tucked away, behind a drawer filled with forgotten letters. The moment I understood its significance, The moment I grasped what Arthur had been quietly orchestrating, I was profoundly shaken. It was the key to the Bitcoin. Initially, I was perplexed. Arthur had always been ahead of his time, recognizing potential where others saw only obscurity. Bitcoin was a prime example, and while I lacked a clear understanding of its implications, I kept the key safe. I didn't liquidate the assets. I didn't inform Samuel. I felt no need to. I wasn't ready for him to perceive me as a woman of wealth. But the tranquil life I had established with Arthur, a life where we possessed everything we needed without drawing attention to ourselves, was about to undergo a dramatic transformation, whether I welcomed it or not. It's ironic, isn't it, how we can coexist with someone for years and still remain unaware of their carefully guarded secrets. Arthur, while alive, was a reserved man, not one for boasting. Yet, there was always an undercurrent, something I couldn't quite decipher. He possessed few close friends, and didn't engage in activities typical of men in his profession. He displayed no interest in fame or fortune, and yet, I somehow sensed that his mind operated on a different plane. Only after his death did I realize the true extent of his vision. I recall the day I discovered the Bitcoin key. It was late afternoon, the sun casting long shadows across the attic floor. I had been sifting through old items, papers from the technological conferences Arthur used to attend, old receipts, bills. There, concealed behind a faded envelope, I found it, a small metallic key, engraved with the word wallet. Initially, I dismissed it as insignificant, something he'd forgotten to discard. But Arthur possessed a unique trait. He never discarded anything unless it held meaning. Therefore, I kept it, uncertain why, eventually placing it in my drawer, giving it little further thought. Time passed, and I had almost forgotten about the key until one evening, while sorting through more of his belongings, I decided to unlock it. I'm not certain what motivated me, perhaps simple curiosity, or perhaps it was an ingrained instinct, a feeling that I needed to uncover a hidden truth. I'd lived in the same house for years, yet I'd never truly examined it the way I did that night. I typed the number etched on the key's reverse, and suddenly, everything changed. A sequence of numbers appeared on my screen, a seemingly random line of code, followed by the amount, the balance. That's when I understood. Arthur had been a visionary. He had invested in Bitcoin when it was virtually worthless, when no one, including myself, understood its potential. He anticipated its future value before anyone else, and now that modest investment, one he had probably forgotten about as well, had blossomed into a substantial fortune, millions. I leaned back in my chair, attempting to process this revelation. I was uncertain how to proceed. It felt like a crushing weight upon my chest. How could I have missed this, and why had Arthur kept it a secret? Secrecy was unlike him. He was always forthright, sometimes excessively so. But this was different. I initially refrained from telling Samuel. He was just a child when Arthur passed away, and despite his adulthood, I questioned whether I could entrust him with this information. Our relationship had always been defined by small gestures, his toys, his homework, the simple comforts of daily life. But something told me that this secret could irrevocably alter our relationship in a way I wasn't prepared for. I kept it to myself. I secured the key, hiding it in the back of my drawer, and continued my quiet life. But internally, something had shifted. I was no longer the woman who had to make do. I now had choices, possibilities I hadn't known existed, but therein lay the challenge. I was unsure how to wield this newfound power, and I certainly didn't want to make a mistake. The quiet moments, the ones I once cherished, began to feel unbearable. The rhythmic tick of the clock in my workshop, the scent of aged papers, these had been my sanctuary, my refuge. But recently, it all felt hollow. The peace I once valued now served as a stark reminder of the growing distance between Samuel and me. It wasn't merely his impending marriage. It wasn't the wedding itself, although it caused me more pain than I could admit. It was the extent of our estrangement. The thought of him in another woman's embrace felt like a cruel joke. I had raised him to be kind, to appreciate the simple things, yet somewhere along the way, he ceased to see me for who I truly was. He perceived me as an outdated relic, an impediment to the life he believed he deserved. I tried to convince myself it was a temporary phase, that he would eventually come around, but each conversation only exacerbated the situation. He was evolving into a man who could barely meet my gaze without a hint of disdain. His words, once sharp, were becoming increasingly cutting, aimed directly at my heart. "Mom, you refuse to adapt. You cling to outdated beliefs. I don't understand you." His voice echoed in my mind, the words lingering long after they were spoken. This wasn't a fleeting comment. It was his truth, and that truth had devastated me. We were worlds apart. Samuel's life revolved around instant gratification, climbing the corporate ladder, proving himself in a world that valued neither history nor the enduring power of simple things. He was obsessed with technology, with speed, with modernity. But me? I was content with my hands immersed in ancient books, with the stories of the past, with restoring the ravages of time. I didn't crave recognition. I craved peace, but Samuel couldn't see that. He saw only stagnation. He saw me as a burden, flashy, wealthy, modern. Samuel remained unaware of the Bitcoin. He knew nothing of Arthur's quiet gamble, or how I had kept it hidden. He believed I was merely a woman stuck in the past, a woman who had sacrificed everything for him, and received nothing in return. And perhaps, he was right. I had dedicated years to giving him my all, my time, my resources, my strength, and now I had nothing left to give. Yet, the Bitcoin, hidden away like a secret treasure, felt like my last remaining hope. But I wasn't ready to share it with Samuel. Not yet. He wasn't ready. He hadn't earned it. I hadn't either, I thought. Not yet. That day, observing Samuel across the room at his wedding, I saw something in his eyes, something I hadn't witnessed in years. It wasn't merely resentment. It was something deeper, a glimmer of recognition of things he had never understood about me. But it was too late. The moment I turned and walked away, I knew things would never be the same. I hadn't anticipated the wedding unfolding as it did, but in retrospect, perhaps I should have. It had all been building towards this iply, this quiet, sharp sting of betrayal I had felt for years, but never truly confronted. The ceremony, I'm told, was exquisite. I didn't stay long enough to verify that myself. Samuel had insisted I stay away, and for a moment I contemplated defying him. What harm could it possibly do? It wasn't as if I was requesting anything more than the opportunity to witness my son's marriage to the woman he had chosen. But when I saw him standing at the altar, his hand clasped in Emma's, I felt like an outsider within my own family. He was radiating happiness, brimming with confidence about his future, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I no longer held a place in it. I tried to convince myself it was merely a wedding, that I could depart without causing a scene. But as I stood there, watching them exchange vows, something within me snapped. I didn't belong in that moment, in that world. They didn't need me. Not really. The ceremony concluded before I realized it. I hadn't even managed to congratulate Samuel or Isabel. I slipped away quietly, unnoticed amidst the throng of guests. As I made my way to the exit, the cool night air refreshed my face, and I inhaled deeply. I should have felt joy for him, but instead, I experienced only a profound hollow ache. Later that evening, alone in my small apartment, Samuel called. I had been dreading it, but I answered nonetheless.
Mom, where were you?
His voice was urgent, bordering on desperate. You should have been there. You ruined everything. I could hear the anger in his voice, the frustration, and for a fleeting moment, I almost apologized. I almost confessed my regret for not being the person he wanted me to be. But then I remembered something that had been gnawing at me for years. The life I had given him, the sacrifices I had made, the love I had poured into him. All of it was gone. He couldn't see me. Not truly. I didn't ruin anything, Samuel, I replied, my voice unwavering. But I believe you're the one who doesn't understand. Don't pretend I'm the one who's clueless, he retorted. You're so consumed by your old books and your quiet life, and now look, Isabel and I are moving forward with our lives. I can't have you holding me back any longer. You're stuck in the past. His words stung, each one sharper than the last. He didn't see the sacrifices I had made, how I had postponed my own dreams to raise him, to secure his future. I wanted to recount all that I had done for him, how I had dedicated my life to building a future he would never truly grasp, but I didn't. I simply listened to his tirade, feeling the crushing weight of it all. I'm not going to apologize for who I am, I said finally. But I won't be a part of your world anymore, Samuel. Not if you can't accept me for who I am. Silence fell on the other end of the line, and for a moment I believed he might finally understand. But the silence was broken, not with an apology or a promise of change, but with a sharp, cutting sentence. You're just going to walk away? Fine, but don't expect to return. You're dead to me. The words hit me like a physical blow. Dead to me. It wasn't the first time I'd heard such words from him, but it was the first time I truly felt their impact. That was the moment I realized how irrevocably damaged our relationship was. I hung up the phone and sat in the darkness, feeling the weight of his words settle around me, but I didn't cry. I couldn't. There was nothing left to cry for. He had made his choice, and I had made mine. As I gazed out the window, I knew I was finished trying to make him understand, finished clinging to a relationship that had been broken for far too long. Samuel had his life, and I had mine, and whatever transpired from that point forward, I wouldn't be the one to initiate reconciliation. The days following the wedding passed in a blur. I didn't hear from Samuel again, and honestly, a part of me felt relieved. The silence wasn't exactly comforting, but it was peaceful. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was walking on eggshells around him, trying to anticipate his moods and expectations. I had my own life to live, now, or at least, that's what I told myself. I spent the following weeks in a kind of daze, lost in the rhythm of my work, the same routine I had followed for decades. The hum of the restoration workshop, the scent of aged leather and paper, it all felt familiar and soothing. Each morning, I would retreat to my small office, close the door, and lose myself in the delicate process of repairing objects that had survived for centuries. In some ways, it felt like the perfect metaphor for my own life, quietly piecing things together, attempting to mend something that was falling apart. I had spent so long fixing things for others, books, paintings, even Samuel, that I had forgotten about myself. But now, with no one to care for except myself, I discovered an unexpected sense of freedom. There was no one to answer to, no one to second-guess me, just me and my work. I began to view things differently, as if I had been granted a second chance. Arthur's Bitcoin investment, the fortune he had left behind, felt more like a burden than a gift. But as I spent more time contemplating it, I realized something. Perhaps it wasn't about the money, perhaps it was about what I could accomplish with it. It wasn't a life-altering sum, but it was enough to secure my future, to live the way I desired. I didn't need a mansion, or extravagant purchases, but there were things I had always longed to do, things Arthur and I had discussed before his death: travel, see the world, experience life beyond the confines of my workshop. My first action was to hire assistants for the shop. It was a modest arrangement, a part-time assistant to handle some of the tedious tasks I had been managing for years. Her name was Lily, and she was young, enthusiastic, and captivated by the art of restoration. It felt good to share the work, to pass on the legacy Arthur and I had built together. She served as a reminder that life still held a future, even when the past felt like it was slipping away. With Lily managing the smaller tasks, I began researching travel options. I avoided hasty decisions, but I started exploring destinations I had always dreamed of visiting: Italy, Greece, Spain. I wasn't ready to depart yet, but the prospect of seeing the world, of finally living for myself, was exhilarating. I had spent so many years caring for Samuel, ensuring he had everything he needed, that I had forgotten my own dreams. But now, it felt like it was my turn. It was my time to be selfish, to live as I pleased. I had already sacrificed so much for my son, and what had I received in return? Only coldness and resentment. I was no longer angry, not at Samuel, not at anyone. I was simply finished trying to prove myself, finished trying to mend relationships that were beyond repair. I wasn't waiting for permission, or for someone to grant me the right to begin living. I was going to embrace the remaining time I had, and make it meaningful, something solely for me. Late one afternoon, the jarring ring of the telephone shattered my deep concentration. I was working on a delicate manuscript, carefully restoring its pages so they could be preserved for another century, when the ring echoed through the quiet workshop. I almost ignored it, but I knew it was him, Samuel. I hadn't heard from him since the wedding, and frankly, I hadn't expected to. He had made his feelings abundantly clear, or so I believe. I wasn't sure what he could possibly say, now that would alter anything. Still, something within me urged me to answer. Perhaps I was still clinging to a shred of hope, a tiny spark of the affection I once knew, the affection he had freely given. I wiped my hands on a cloth, and answered the phone. "Mom," his voice came through the line, hesitant at first. "I need to talk to you." A lengthy pause ensued. I remained silent, allowing the silence to hang between us. I was uncertain what I was supposed to say. I wasn't angry anymore, just weary. Weary of pretense, weary of expectations, weary of trying to be the perfect mother for someone who couldn't appreciate it. "Why didn't you come?" he asked, his voice softening. I thought you'd be there. I wanted you to be there." I could sense the guilt in his tone, and for a moment I almost felt pity for him. It wasn't easy being caught between two worlds, a mother who had always been there for him, and a wife who desired nothing to do with the past. He had married Isabel, and I knew deep down that I was no longer a part of that world, not anymore. "I wasn't going to cause a scene, Samuel," I replied, my voice steady. "I made my choice. You made yours." He paused, seemingly unsure how to continue. "I didn't mean what I said. You have to understand, I was just overwhelmed. It was my wedding, and I thought it would be better if you weren't there. But now I regret it. I wish you could have been there." The words sounded sincere, but I remained unconvinced. He had spoken worse things, and I wasn't about to allow him to rewrite history. I had spent too many years apologizing for things that didn't require an apology. "You don't have to regret it, Samuel," I said softly. "It was your day. You didn't need me there." I waited for his response, but only silence followed. I could almost feel the distance between us widening with each passing second. It was as if the words we were exchanging were no longer real, merely echoes of what once was. "I am sorry, Mom," he said, the apology sounding more like an afterthought. "I know I haven't been the best son, and I've probably hurt you more than I'll ever understand, but I don't want to lose you." I took a deep breath. "You already have." It wasn't harsh, just the truth. There was a finality to it, something I had come to accept over time. Samuel had made his choice when he turned his back on me, and I, in turn, had made mine. I wasn't angry at him anymore, but I couldn't continue pretending that everything was all right when it clearly wasn't. "You're my son," I said gently. "But you've built your life, and I've built mine. We can't continue clinging to what's already gone." He struggled to speak, but I didn't give him the chance to say anything further. "I'm not angry, Samuel," I said, interrupting him. "I'm simply finished, and I'm at peace with that now." For a moment there was only the sound of his breathing on the other end of the line. Then finally, he spoke. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," I replied, my voice steady. "I've said everything I needed to." And with that, I hung up the phone. I stood there for a considerable time, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the quiet that had settled around me. Samuel had finally uttered the words I needed to hear, even if they were insufficient to undo the damage. I wasn't sure if things could ever return to how they once were, but I didn't need them to. It was over, and in a strange way, it felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The days following my conversation with Samuel were quiet, almost unnervingly so. The silence in my workshop seemed amplified. The ticking of the old clock on the wall was almost painfully sharp, but I wasn't disturbed by it. I had grown accustomed to quiet. There was a certain comfort in the absence of noise and expectations. I hadn't given much thought to the Bitcoin for some time after that night. It wasn't something I liked to dwell upon. The fortune Arthur had left me felt both like a blessing and a burden. What was I supposed to do with it? What was the point of wealth when you had no one to share it with? But one evening, seated in the dim light of my workshop, carefully restoring an old painting, my thoughts drifted back to the wallet key. I had kept it hidden in a small drawer, tucked beneath some old papers. No one had inquired about it, and I was relieved. It wasn't something I ever intended to reveal to Samuel, not yet. He had no idea what I possessed, and a part of me wanted to keep it that way. The idea of him knowing, of him expecting something from me, felt unsettling. Yet, the temptation lingered in the back of my mind. The Bitcoin was now worth millions. I could sell it. I could relocate, start anew. I could travel as I had always dreamed, see the world. I had never truly lived for myself. There had always been someone else. Samuel, Arthur. And now, it could be my turn. I hadn't touched the wallet key for months, but tonight, something felt different. I felt a pull, a need to know exactly what awaited me. So I went to the drawer, retrieved the key, and sat at my desk. My hands were steady as I typed the number, the code Arthur had inscribed on the key's reverse all those years ago. The screen flickered for a moment, then displayed the balance. Millions. I stared at the number, my mind racing. It was more money than I ever thought I would possess. Yet it didn't feel like a windfall. It felt like a reminder of everything I had lost. Arthur had seen something in this, had believed in it, and now it had paid off. But I was uncertain of my feelings. It was a lot to absorb. What would Samuel think if he knew? Would he expect me to share it with him, to give him everything he had ever desired? Would he believe I had withheld it out of spite, or because I wanted to control him? The idea of him gaining access to this money, of him believing it was rightfully his, made my stomach churn. But it wasn't merely about the money, it was about what it represented. Arthur had believed in this, had seen the potential for something greater, something beyond the conventional world of wealth and status. He had made a choice, one that ultimately changed everything for us. For me, the fortune wasn't just a bank balance. It was a testament to his vision, his ability to perceive the future. It was a piece of him, a fragment of the life we could have shared if only he had lived long enough to see it. I wasn't going to allow anyone to take that choice from me. Not Samuel, not anyone. The following few days were filled with a strange sense of clarity. My life, once tranquil and routine, now felt poised on the brink of something new, something unknown. I wasn't sure if I was prepared to take that leap, but I knew I couldn't continue living as I had, not anymore. I had spent so many years focused on everyone else, Samuel, maintaining the workshop, clinging to memories of Arthur, that I had forgotten about myself. It was as if I had been living on autopilot, keeping my head down, doing the work, and simply getting by. But the world had changed around me, and now I was facing a crossroads. The Bitcoin, the fortune Arthur had left behind, was a symbol of a future I hadn't planned for, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to embrace it yet. I often found myself standing at the windows of my workshop, gazing at the streets of Santa Monica. The city had undergone significant transformations over the years. The world outside my small corner of it had shifted in ways I hadn't noticed until now. Young people hurried down the sidewalks, glued to their phones, the pulse of modern life moving faster than I could keep pace with. It was strange, unsettling almost, to think that this was the world Samuel now inhabited, a world where everything revolved around convenience, speed, and status. I wasn't a part of that world, and I wasn't sure I ever wanted to be. I had never been one to embrace technology in the way Samuel had. He had always been drawn to the digital realm, to the concept of instant access and instant gratification. I used to wonder if I had somehow failed him by not being a part of that world, but now, looking at the gleaming, fast-paced world outside my workshop, I realized I didn't need to be a part of it. I didn't need to. I had something else, something slower, more meaningful, a connection to the past that wasn't merely nostalgia. It was about preserving something authentic. When I restored a book or a piece of art, I didn't merely repair the physical damage. I brought the story back to life, and that was something no amount of technology could replicate. But as I reflected further, I realized I didn't want to live my entire life in the past either. Arthur had recognized something in Bitcoin that I hadn't understood at the time, and now I had the opportunity to do something with it, something that could provide me with a future, even if it meant venturing outside my comfort zone. The question was, what was I supposed to do with that future? I had spent so much time focused on keeping everything together, ensuring Samuel had what he needed, that I had forgotten my own dreams. I had always wanted to travel, to see the world, to experience life beyond this small workshop, but there had always been something else to do, always someone else to care for. I had put my life on hold for so long that I didn't even know where to begin. But now, I had the chance to choose for myself. I had the chance to live for me. I wasn't ready to take the leap yet, but the idea of having the freedom to live my life as I pleased filled me with a quiet sense of excitement. I didn't need to chase after the fast-paced digital world that Samuel had embraced. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. I simply needed to be true to myself, to live on my own terms. And perhaps, just perhaps, that would be enough. It wasn't the kind of regret I had anticipated. I believed that when I made the decision to distance myself from Samuel, to cease trying to repair what had broken between us, I would experience a sense of finality, a sense of peace. But instead, I found myself adrift in a sea of thoughts I couldn't quiet: the past, the future, the decisions I had made. They all intertwined in my mind like an old frayed thread. I had decided that I wasn't going to pursue him anymore. That was clear. I couldn't keep pleading for a relationship with someone who had no interest in understanding me. But as the days passed, a small voice within me began to question whether I had made the right choice. Had I truly made peace with it, or was I simply hiding from the truth? I hadn't heard from Samuel since the phone call. A part of me, a significant part, was relieved by the silence, but there was still that tiny flicker of doubt. What if this was the last time I would ever speak to him? What if I had given up too soon? I tried to keep myself occupied, immersing myself in my work, but it wasn't enough to silence the nagging feeling that lingered in the pit of my stomach. The thought of him, of his life continuing without me, without any acknowledgement of all I had done, was difficult to ignore. The more I tried to banish it from my mind, the more it seemed to take hold. The telephone sat on the corner of my desk, a constant reminder that it was still there. It had been nearly a week since the wedding, but I couldn't bring myself to pick it up. A part of me wanted to call him, to explain again that I wasn't angry, that I simply couldn't continue fighting for something he wasn't willing to fight for. But another part of me knew that nothing would change. No matter how many times I tried to explain myself, it would never be enough for him to truly understand. The more I contemplated it, the more I realized that perhaps I was the one who needed to change. Not for Samuel, but for me. For the first time in a long while, I was truly living for myself. The choices I made now had nothing to do with anyone else's expectations. The Bitcoin, the money Arthur had left, wasn't about making amends. It wasn't about proving my worth to anyone. It was about reclaiming my life. Yet, a lingering sadness persisted in my heart, a small persistent ache I couldn't shake. I had tried so hard for so many years to be the mother Samuel wanted, to be the person he needed. But somewhere along the way, I had lost myself. And now, as I stared at the telephone on my desk, I realized that even though I was beginning to rediscover myself, there would always be a part of me that wondered what could have been. What might have happened if I had held on a little longer, if I had tried harder. But that was the problem. I had tried too hard, for too long. The truth was, I couldn't keep waiting for Samuel to change. I couldn't continue hoping for him to see me, to understand the sacrifices I had made. I had to let him go, and so I did. I picked up the telephone and switched it off, sliding it back into the drawer. I wasn't ready to confront the regret yet, but perhaps one day Samuel would understand. Perhaps he would see how much I had loved him, how much I had sacrificed for him. But for now, that wasn't my burden to carry. I had already let him go. Now I had to let myself go too. It's remarkable how swiftly things can change. One moment, everything appears perfectly still, and then, in the blink of an eye, everything shifts. I had believed I was finally in control of my life again, free from the guilt and obligation that had bound me to Samuel for so long. But it wasn't to last. Samuel called again. I saw his name flash on the screen, and for a brief moment, I hesitated. My hand hovered over the phone, and I almost didn't answer. I had made peace with the silence, with the distance that had grown between us. But I couldn't ignore it this time. It was him, and I knew he wasn't calling simply to check on me. Mom. Samuel's voice crackled through the line. He sounded anxious, almost frantic. I need your help. I frowned. It wasn't the first time he'd asked for help, but it was the first time he sounded like this. The urgency in his voice gave me pause. I sat down at my desk, bracing myself for whatever he was about to say. What's going on? I asked, trying to maintain a neutral tone, although I could already feel the familiar tightness in my chest. It's my business, he said, his words tumbling out faster now. The startup I've been working on. Things aren't going well, and I need cash, fast. I know you have the Bitcoin, and I need it. I wasn't sure I had heard him correctly. I didn't want to believe it. Was he really asking for money? Again? I leaned back in my chair, my grip tightening around the phone. You want me to give you the Bitcoin? I repeated, disbelief washing over me. You think just because I possess it, it's yours for the taking? No, it's not like that. He quickly backpedaled. I'm just asking for a little help. I know I haven't been the best son, and I get it. I do, but this is different. This is business. I'm trying to build something, and I need you to believe in me, just this once. I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping my lips before I could stop it. Believe in you? The words felt foreign, yet the truth was, they had been on the tip of my tongue for years. I had believed in him. I had believed in everything he could be. I sacrificed so much for him, did everything I could, to ensure he had opportunities I never had. But somewhere along the way, I ceased being his mother. I became a resource, a bank he could draw from whenever he faced hardship, and I was weary of it. Samuel, you don't understand, I said, my voice steady, even though my heart was pounding. The Bitcoin isn't just some fund you can dip into whenever things go wrong. It wasn't intended to be your safety net. He was quiet for a moment, and I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. He wasn't accustomed to being refused. He was used to me being there, ready to intervene and resolve any problem. I had always been the one to pick up the pieces when his life fell apart, but not anymore. Mom, please, he pleaded, his voice softer now. I don't know who else to turn to. You're all I have left. Please. I paused, my fingers lightly tapping on the desk. He was using the words that always worked on me, the words that made me feel guilty, the words that tugged at my heart. But this time, they didn't have the same effect. Samuel, I said, my voice finally breaking through the silence. I've given you everything. I've done everything for you. But this is mine. I've worked for it, and it's not yours to take. There was a long pause, and for a moment, I thought he might finally understand. But then he spoke, and I could hear the frustration in his voice. You're being unreasonable, he said, his tone growing sharper. It's just money, Mom. It's not like you need it. You're sitting on a fortune and doing nothing with it. Why can't you just help me out? I felt the last of my patience slipping away. The weight of the years, of the sacrifices, of the unspoken resentment. It all came crashing down. It's not about the money, Samuel. It's about the fact that you don't see me. You never have. You've only ever seen what I can give you. But I'm not your bank. I'm not your safety net. I'm your mother, and that means something different now. There was no response on the other end of the line. No apology. No acknowledgement of what I had said. Just silence. "I'm sorry, Mom," he finally mumbled, and the words felt hollow. "I'll figure it out. I won't ask again." I hung up the phone before he could say anything else. I sat there for a long time, staring at the phone, the weight of his demand still heavy in my chest, but this time there was no regret, no second guessing. I had made my decision, and for the first time in years, I felt certain of it. The quiet that followed Samuel's call settled in like a weight, but not one that crushed me. Instead, it was as if I had been carrying it for so long that I had forgotten it was even there. The truth was, I had sacrificed enough. I had spent my life believing that love meant giving up parts of myself for the sake of others. But now I realized that I had given away more than I could afford. I spent the next few days reflecting on the call, Samuel's voice full of expectation, of entitlement, and the strange emptiness that followed. I hadn't expected him to understand, but I hadn't expected him to demand so much from me either. And I realized in that moment that it wasn't just about the Bitcoin. It never had been. It was about everything I had given, and everything I had left to give. It wasn't the first time Samuel had asked for help, and I knew it wouldn't be the last. But this time something had shifted in me. I wasn't going to be his fallback anymore. I wasn't going to be the one to pick up the pieces when he couldn't make things work. I had spent too many years walking on eggshells around him, making sure he had what he needed, making sure he wasn't disappointed in me. I had lived my life for him, for Arthur, for everyone except myself. But that had to end. The next morning, I went to the drawer where I kept the Bitcoin key. It had been sitting there, untouched, waiting for a decision I was too afraid to make. I picked it up, holding it in my hand like I was holding a piece of my future. It wasn't just about the money, I told myself. It was about control, about making the decision to take back what was mine. I couldn't change what had happened with Samuel. I couldn't undo the years of sacrifice, or the growing distance between us, but I could change how I moved forward. And it started with this. I didn't immediately cash out the Bitcoin. I wasn't ready to part with it just yet, but I made the decision to use it, not for Samuel, not for anyone else, but for me. It was time to start living for myself. I began to plan my first trip, something small, just a weekend getaway to a quiet place outside the city. The idea of being alone, truly alone in a place where no one could expect anything from me, was exhilarating. For the first time in years, I felt like I was standing on the edge of something I had wanted for so long, something I had buried deep inside me. Freedom. I wasn't sure what the future held, but that was the point, wasn't it? I had spent too many years following the path that was laid out for me. Now I was choosing my own. The next few days were filled with a strange sense of anticipation. I wasn't sure what I was waiting for, but I knew I was on the verge of something significant. Maybe it was just the fact that I had finally taken control of my life. Or maybe it was the idea that for the first time I was living for me. And that felt good, really good. It didn't take much to start. Just a weekend trip, a simple getaway. But that simple plan felt like a revolution. I had booked a small cabin by the lake, far away from the noise, far from the life I had built around everyone else. It wasn't luxurious, but it was perfect. Just me, the sound of the water, the wind through the trees, and nothing else. I packed lightly, as if to reinforce the idea that I wasn't carrying any baggage anymore, physical or emotional. I had done my best to carry the weight of everyone else for so long, but now I was shedding it. I didn't need much, a few clothes, a journal, a camera, and the peace I had been craving for so long. The drive was quiet, and as the city faded behind me, I could feel the tension in my shoulders begin to ease. For the first time in ages, I wasn't checking my phone every 5 minutes, wasn't listening for a message or a call. There was no one depending on me, no one expecting anything, and it felt like a release. When I arrived at the cabin, I stood there for a moment, taking in the sight of the lake, the mountains in the distance. It was breathtaking. And for a moment, I just stood there, breathing in the air, like it was the first time I had ever truly taken a breath. The next few days were a blur of simplicity. I woke up with the sun, made coffee on the small porch, and watched the light change across the water. I spent hours walking through the woods, taking photographs of the landscape. There were no deadlines, no urgent phone calls, no expectations. There was only the here and now. I had time to think, time to reflect. For the first time in years, I wasn't running. I wasn't trying to keep up. I wasn't fixing things, or trying to solve problems that didn't belong to me. I began to understand something important. The life I had been living wasn't the only one available to me. I had been so focused on others, on Samuel, on keeping everything together, that I had lost sight of who I was. But now, in this place, I was finding pieces of myself I had long forgotten. The next morning, I sat on the porch, my feet propped up on the railing, and I opened my journal. I hadn't written in it in years, but today felt different. Today felt like the beginning of something new. For the first time in a long time, I wrote, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I wrote about the freedom I was feeling, about the weight that had lifted from my shoulders. I wrote about the woman I was becoming, the woman I was finally letting myself be. The trip wasn't just a break from my life, it was a rebirth. It was a chance to rebuild my life, my identity, and my sense of self-worth. I wasn't just the woman who had lived for everyone else. I was Eleanor Vance, and I was going to live for me. And as I closed my journal that night, the last light of the day fading into dusk, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. I returned home from my trip, feeling like a transformed person. The cabin by the lake had been a sanctuary, a temporary escape that had given me space to breathe, to think. But as I pulled into the driveway of the house I had shared with Samuel for years, I knew it was time for the final step. Samuel hadn't contacted me in the weeks since the phone call. There had been no apology, no genuine attempt to bridge the gap between us, and for once, I wasn't waiting for him to make the first move. I was done with that. I had spent my life hoping that if I just held on long enough, he would come around. But the truth was, I couldn't keep waiting for him. I couldn't keep living my life based on his decisions, his moods, his demands. I took a deep breath as I unlocked the door and stepped into the house. It felt familiar, too familiar. The worn furniture, the pictures on the walls, the silence that seemed to fill every room. This house had been a home once, but now it felt like a prison. The years of sacrifice, the years of being the caretaker, the mediator, it all hit me in that moment. I had been living for everyone else, and it was time to stop. I went to my room and began packing. I wasn't leaving forever, although part of me wondered if I was, but for now, I needed to leave this house behind. I needed to create some space between me and everything that had weighed me down. As I packed my bags, I realized something. The physical act of leaving was almost easy. It was the emotional part that was hard. The part where I finally had to let go of the idea that things could ever go back to the way they were. When I was done, I took one last look around the house. I had spent years here raising Samuel, making a life with Arthur, but those days were over. This house wasn't mine anymore. I stepped outside, suitcase in hand, and closed the door behind me. There was no fanfare, no dramatic exit, just me, walking away from the life I had known, the life I had been holding on to for so long. I wasn't angry anymore. I had been angry at Samuel, at Arthur, at myself, but anger was exhausting, and I was tired of carrying it. I had learned that letting go wasn't just about walking away, it was about forgiving myself for the things I had done for others, at the expense of my own happiness. As I drove away, leaving the house and Samuel behind, I felt lighter than I had in years. I wasn't sure where I was going or what the future held, but for the first time, I didn't feel lost. I felt free. The apartment I moved into wasn't anything special. 2 bedrooms, hardwood floors, a tiny balcony that looked out over the tops of other buildings. But when I opened the windows and let the breeze in, it felt like freedom. It was mine, all of it. Not Samuel's, not Arthur's, not anyone else's, just mine. I furnished it slowly, second-hand chairs, a reading lamp from a thrift store, plants I didn't know the names of but liked anyway. I set up a corner for my restoration work, although I was only taking on small jobs now, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. For the first time, I was choosing every part of my life with intention. I even bought a plane ticket, Spain. The idea came to me one morning, as I sipped my coffee by the window. I remembered a book Arthur once brought home to restore, an old travel diary, written by a woman who had walked the Camino de Santiago. I remembered how moved I was by her entries, her quiet determination to do something just for herself. That stayed with me, so I booked the flight. No hesitation, no asking for permission. I was going. Before I left, I sat down and did something I hadn't done in years. I wrote a letter, not to Samuel, but to Arthur. Ben, you saw something I didn't. In technology, in Bitcoin, in me. I've held on to your gift for so long, afraid to use it, afraid it would change who I am. But you knew, didn't you, that I'd need it, that someday, I'd finally choose myself. Samuel never understood. Maybe one day he will, maybe not. But I've let go. I'm not angry anymore. I've just learned to stop expecting from people who don't see me. You did. You always did. I miss you, but I'm okay now. Really. Okay. Eleanor? I folded the letter and placed it inside the first book Arthur ever restored, a small poetry collection, tattered and yellowed but still holding together. I shelved it, not to forget him, but to keep that piece of us in its place, safe, respected. Spain was beautiful. I walked through sun-drenched streets, ate food I couldn't pronounce, got lost more than once, and didn't mind at all. I met people, other women, traveling alone, not running from anything, just running towards something. One night, someone asked me if I had family. I paused before answering. I had a son, I said. Still do, I guess, but we don't speak much anymore. The woman nodded. Sometimes that's for the best. I didn't feel the need to explain. For once, I didn't feel guilty. I just smiled. On the flight home, I looked out the window and thought, this is what it means to live. Not survive, not serve, but live. And that's what I was going to keep doing.